Hi, everybody. Welcome for joining us today. We are on tap for another great Wednesday Virtual Connect with a panel on weathering the storm. Just as a reminder, you get one learning unit for attending today's session. You need to have RSVP'd online via the calendar event for today's session. Most of you have already done that, but in case you haven't, we've got a link in the chat for you to do so. And then at the end, when you stay through, to get that credit, we'll ask you to enter your name and member number in the chat as well. And then to participate as a panelist with the panelists in the conversation today, from an audience perspective, we encourage you to use the Q&A function. We've got a few questions queued up that we've talked about, topics that we'd like to cover as a group today, but of course, you're welcome to influence that discussion as much as we are. So take part in that by using the feature at the bottom of your Zoom panel for the Q&A, and we will make sure to get those questions answered as soon as we can. So our panelists today are from all over the state in many different types of firms and practice types and career stages even. So I will call on them one at a time from the order that I see them on my screen, and we'll start with Nan Anderson. Hello, Nan.
Hi, Mike, and thanks so much for bringing us all together. Excited about today's discussion. So I'm Nan Anderson, formerly a principal with Anderson Hillis Architects for 30 years. So over those 30 years, certainly weathered a lot of storms. Still here to talk about it. And 3 years ago, my husband Dave and I started an architect-led design build firm. So we did have a firm of 20, which is still going strong. And we now have a firm up in Leadville called Freight Leadville of 4. So glad to be here today.
Glad to have you. Thanks for joining us, Nan. Next, we have Rich Carr. Hi, Rich.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for the invite. I look forward to the conversation. I'm Rich Carr. I'm a partner in Carr Architects, CCY Architects. We're based in the Roaring Fork Valley. We have been for almost 50 years. I have been practicing based out here for over 30, if you can believe that. And like Nan, have weathered at least 4 or 5 storms, depending on the order of magnitude you define a storm. We have about 40 folks in the firm, and we focus on resort hospitality and private residential work all over the Western U.S. and sometimes beyond. We're working in China right now and in Vermont and other fun places. And in terms of AI involvement, we've been involved in AI for the entire history of our firm. Our whole leadership team is active in the AIA. We have a number of people volunteering on lots of fronts and help organizing design conferences, et cetera. So it's great to be participating in AIA today as well.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Glad you're here. And Nan, you actually skipped your list of AIA involvement. We would probably take about 10 minutes just to get through that. So just know that she's been very, very active on a number of fronts, and particularly with the Business Architecture Group most recently. Next, we have Nick Caravella. Welcome, Nick. Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you for including me on this. I've weathered probably the least storms of everybody on the panel. I was a graduate in 2012, so came in a little bit after the 2008 recession, and really kind of grabbing onto the horns on this one. I work with Ingenious IO. They are a tech company that serves architects, owners, and contractors through some new technology. And so I've recently kind of left traditional practice and joined them to help create and develop in this new platform. But I also do work remotely as of a month ago with Method Group out of Oklahoma. They hired me as a project architect and kind of process manager to help them be lean through times like this. So it's a different lens, but very excited to be part of this conversation as well. And then with AIA involvement, hail from New Jersey. I've been on the NAC and the Young Architects Forum, and now serve on the Secretary Advisory Committee, as well as helping get the Emerging Professionals Committee off the ground here in Colorado.
Great, thanks, Nick. And last but certainly not least, Matt Cecere. Welcome, Matt. Glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here too. It's a great opportunity. So yeah, my name is Matt Cecere. I'm a principal at 4240 Architecture. Our firm was established in 2003 as an intentionally mid-size architecture firm based in Colorado, actually in Denver. We're about 35 people, and we've been known to work across the world, but probably in the last few years, really been focusing on Colorado, not only Metro Denver, but also up in the mountains and really along the Front Range. Really built our core practice around design ingenuity, client service, and memorable outcomes. That we focus on a wide variety of project typologies and scales, and we'll get into that down the road as well, but really a balanced programmatic requirements with the needs of diverse end users with a fine-grained sensitivity and attention to the craft and detail. Detail is really quite important to the overall kind of that final part of it, of the design. Speaking a little bit more about myself, I was born and raised in New England. I was really drawn by the allure, if you will, of the Rocky Mountains and made my way out about 20 years ago. And I've been with the same firm for those 20 years. 4240 broke off from a former firm called Urban Design Group in 2003, as I mentioned earlier. And I've been the principal of the firm for the past 5 years. And I've been able to weather, I guess you could say, 2 storms, and now we're in the middle of this third one for me. And definitely have learned a lot over the years about resiliency and how to push through it. In terms of my involvement with AIA, I've been a 2-time co-chair of the Practice and Design Conference Committee, and also participated as a volunteer for a variety of other committees or events along the way. So again, thank you all very much for having me participate.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Matt. We had one more panelist who had committed to us early on, Greg Friesen, who's the owner of CSNA Architects down in Colorado Springs. He gets an excused absence today. He had one of his most loyal repeat clients call him to start a new project. And of course, this was the time they wanted to have that call. So we will give him a pass and continue with the group we have right now. So just to kind of tee this up a little bit, I remember it wasn't long after I started in AIA, I was at a national event and somebody from another state said, you know, the only bad part about being an architect are the downturns that tend to plague our profession and hurt us really badly. I imagine that might not be 100% true. There are probably some other things that aren't awesome about practicing architecture besides the economic cycles, but that is absolutely the biggest one, I would imagine. How is this economic climate, in your experience, different than some previous ones that you faced? Matt, you want to start that off?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I've been able to weather a few of these, and the last one, as Nick mentioned, the Great Recession about a decade ago, is still really fresh in our minds, at least for the past few years. We've had this incredible growth for the past 10 or 11 years. And I feel like there's almost like this monkey in our back, like, when's it gonna come? When's that next downturn? Because they come. And now we're in one. Nobody saw it coming this way, but it's here. And but fundamentally, it's pretty different. Our economic foundations are relatively sound from all that we hear. I can't say that I'm an economist or financial whiz at all, but from what all those experts are telling us, everything is sound. But the reality of this global pandemic and the fear of what lies ahead have really shaken individuals, businesses, economies, and really just everything globally. Many market sectors are being hit hard again. Hospitality, especially including hotels, restaurant, retail, are being decimated, even more than in the previous downturn. Uniquely, the office market is slowing in a wide variety of ways. We're here sitting, talking remotely and trying to figure out what's the new norm for office. And so that's going to be an interesting challenge to overcome. One of the other ones that's really challenging and interesting, but unfortunate at the same time, is municipal and state bond market is really challenged. That is something that we haven't seen in other downturns. This is really, really unique. And then couple that with loss of sales tax revenue. Many government projects are on hold, which we just wouldn't expect. Usually there's sort of this cycle where you have a hot market with the developers, and then the municipalities are a little bit less. And then during a downturn, it flips and inverts. But we're not seeing that. It's almost everything's tracking down. That's something that's terribly unique. And then I think ultimately there's just uncertainty about the specific solutions to address these problems locally, nationally, and globally. But I think the good news is that although we're not likely to have a V-type economic turndown, there's signs that we will come out of this recession more quickly than the last one. The stock market has dipped a large percentage, but has largely come back. Scientists are working feverishly to get a vaccine, and there's promise it could already be ready in record time. So we'll have to see about that one. But because of the fundamentals of the economy, being sound. I think individuals, businesses, and governments are eager to get going, and that's really a great sign, all things considered.
Yeah, what's weird about this one is there's usually a triggering event that brings you into a downturn, whether it's 9/11, there was a terrorist attack that triggered a retraction, and then you had the housing credit market collapse in 2008. But it's just a long way back up. So of course the trigger event was the stay-at-home orders and the COVID-19 response to that. But there's also a trigger event that might bring us out quickly, which would be the widespread adoption of a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So it may not necessarily be this slow climb back that we've had since the last recession, which could be a unique and hopefully fortuitous feature of this recovery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nick, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're the graybeard here, right? So
well, I have done a little bit of research since I do work with Ingenious and kind of serve the industry as well as a vendor. And so this recession is uniquely different than a lot of the ones that we have encountered in the past. I mean, it largely has to do with the stay-at-home-ness of this. And so finding ways for the hospitality areas to stay in business and keep moving, and even historically, there's been upticks in residential spending when there's a downturn because costs are better. With this, nobody wants anybody in their home, so it's really a very different story. But one thing that I do kind of look optimistically about what's going on today is problems haven't really ever been so obvious. We're looking at how Denver right now is looking at closing down streets and allowing restaurants to open into them to allow for safe spacing. So in a lot of ways, I weirdly look at this as a gift. We've never had problems be so clear to us and opportunities for us to solve them. And so I think there's a lot of ways to attack what's happening in the economy today head on that might not have been so obvious when just the housing bubble bursts and what do we do? So there is a really unique opportunity for design solutions that I think is different about this recession.
Yeah, that's a great point. The last recession was triggered by real estate and people in that world, and it had a negative stigma about it for a number of years. And now I think the people who are involved in placemaking and design of human interaction have the chance to step up and actually be, certainly not heroic in the sense that our health professionals have been, but there's definitely something that the architecture profession can do to bring about a new way of engaging human society.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a hopeful sign.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rich, what are you seeing out in your experience there in the Roaring Fork Valley compared to other experiences you've had?
Well, I think I agree with what Matt was saying is it's really different than the last big recession. And it's also really early. We're just 2 months into this. The last and really the main recession that I've experienced in my career was the Great Recession, and it was 4 years. It was a long, long slog. And we had things happen. We lost about 3/4 of our revenue in 90 days in the fall of 2008. And then it took 3 or 4 more years to finally find a way to get out of it. And probably our worst year was actually 12, because by then we had been good at cutting back on everything and getting through, but we had to start reinvesting. And the fee side and other things had not really come back as much until the end of 12 for us. So it really feels, I almost feel like we're going to jinx it if we're not careful, if we get too optimistic. But it's great to hear Nick's optimism. I love that. And I've heard a lot of good optimism from clients, from ULI forums, AIA, et cetera. So I think I've actually heard some very compelling cases for the V recovery. I've heard other compelling ones about a W recovery. And I think no one knows because it's obviously it gets back to the vaccine or ways to feel much more safe. And if that's 6 months away, 18 months away, 24 months away, or never happens, right? So lots of questions as this drags on, or if it drags on. So But I think, as Matt had mentioned, it is really different so far, and I hope it stays different in terms of our businesses and be able to move forward. We feel pretty fortunate to be focused on basically people engaging with nature is a big portion of what we do, whether that's private residences or resorts. And a lot of the places we work are not in urban areas. And there's been a fair amount of discussion, like in Lake Tahoe, for example, of people wanting to migrate from the cities, at least in the short run. And some real estate people thinking that's going to be a boon to whether it's Park City, Aspen, Telluride, Tahoe types of places, Hamptons, whatever it might be, all places that we practice in. And I think the other downturns, Nan and I have been around long enough to go through many different cycles. The ones before the Great Recession were really very different from my early, let's say my first 20 years of practice. They were more like business cycles. And although we had contracted in some and changed things up, they weren't anywhere near the big drama that we saw 10 years ago. And Matt, you also mentioned, I still feel like I'm getting kicked in the gut every day sometimes now because it's reminding me of what the drama that we went 10 years ago. It's pretty interesting in psychology. So I think 10 years ago humbled a lot of us. It really made a big difference in terms of refocusing on what matters. And I think what's happening now for a lot of us, there's another reset going on. And you guys were hinting at that. What is this reset going to do in terms of resiliency, what matters to us, what matters to our clients, and how to evolve things and be probably more nimble than ever in terms of how we move forward.
I'm especially struck by your comment about, working with projects that highlight and enhance nature, because boy, people who are spending so much time indoors right now are really craving that.
Well, there's a lot of focus on resort and rural and outdoor experiences coming forward, and there has been. And another thing we're seeing is kind of the advancement of a number of trends that are already underway. Wellness would be one of the most obvious ones. Wellness is already pushing pretty hard into a lot of our resort projects, and how to dial that up even more. Even the medical side of wellness coming into resort environments, for example, is something we've been talking about on several recent projects. And clearly, I think it's going to be dialed up even more.
Yeah. Well, Nan, great time to start a new venture, right? Is there anything that you're taking from your past go-arounds to give you some confidence and hope going forward on this one?
Sometimes you just have to close your eyes and jump, because if you pause and wonder too long, then you'll just start spinning, and in a negative direction. So, I think that one of the aspects of resiliency is that if you live through enough of these cycles, you realize you build resiliency because you realize things are going to keep moving forward. It's not as though society stops. Things will change. I think one of the most exciting aspects of this pandemic is that according to most prognosticators, we're becoming a more productive society. And part of that is that we get to choose what hour of the day we work. So we've got methods for collaboration, but we also have ways to unwind during the day. So I think that architecture by its nature is collaborative, but we're finding new ways to collaborate and still get out for a little bit of a bike ride or something at lunchtime. So I think it's a healthy environment. I think we're going to see more remote working. And I think that the tourism industry, surprisingly enough, which really tanked, they just disappeared completely back in early March, is starting to come back. Just even over the weekend, we were seeing license plates from Texas and Michigan and Wisconsin. It's starting to ease, and I think we're finding new ways to engage in the natural environment, which is terrific for everyone.
Mm-hmm. We've got a question from sort of related to that. As these places open up more and people come from, not only across the street but across the country, are you finding ways to help existing clients who are asking for help on social distancing measures, whether they be a restaurant or a workplace? And how are you responding? And then the follow-up to that is, are you charging fees to those sectors that are really struggling right now? Or doing something like a a COVID disclaimer or pro bono or discounting, or we'll help you now to make the adaptation with the expectation that when you do a more typical architecture project, we hope we get the first phone call. I'll throw that out to anybody who wants to take it.
Well, I'll just jump in because I was just listening to a podcast about the restaurant industry, and obviously 50% of your tables aren't going to pay the bills. So restaurants are really going to have to pivot strongly because they'll have to seek new ways to either package meals and get them out to diners, or offer drive-through services, or whatever, at least in the short term. And then in the long term, it's a question of who's going to come back and who feels comfortable. So I'm not sure that, I know that there are firms out there that are looking at everything from triage type healthcare models that provide for more social distancing to restaurants and schools that are offering distance learning. So I think we're going to have to get creative in the short term. Hopefully that's not going to completely guide our long-term solutions.
I'll give a plug here real quick, Rich. We do have a group of folks from AIA Colorado who are helping the Colorado Restaurant Association on these new public health guidelines, and some of as cities start announcing when they can open and how they can open, we'll be able to help them with that. A lot of the focus right now is seasonal. So, it's a great time to use the outdoors. So if you have sidewalk space, even parking space in front of your restaurant or adjacent to it in a lot, how can we use that and make some more safe spaces for people to dine and increase the capacity? Because the numbers just don't pencil out for almost any occupancy type when you're at 25 or 50%. Anyway, go ahead, Rich.
Well, this is slightly off track. We haven't had a lot of, in the last 2 months, helping people react in the short term, but we've started to have a lot of discussions on more the long term, to what Nan was talking about. And this is with large new projects or fairly new projects, like new communities we've been involved in or starting. And there's obviously a looming question: how is this going to affect? How should we physically respond? Or will it be back to physically similar 2 years from now or 3 years from now? And I think our firm really is starting to kind of do a research project to start thinking through what that could be in terms of how you would think differently about meeting spaces, about restaurant spaces, et cetera, et cetera. And we've already started talking about things like getting rid of the double loaded corridors. That's a trend that was happening for us before this all started happening, but things like that, where we try to minimize the sharing in some cases. But of course, in some cases, that's contrary to building community, right? So there's a real debate going on of where things might be going and how can you do both? How can you build community in place, engage nature, and maybe have a little bit more resiliency in terms of, if the next pandemic happens, let's say, or if this one never really fully goes away.
It reminds me of a moment that maybe the parallel is what happened when ADA passed, or when we started having more attacks on public buildings, whether they're school shootings or federal courthouses, those sorts of things. The best solutions are there, but not in your face. So it's adaptable to the situation at hand that caused everybody to be nervous, but it's also not as obvious. So maybe, we don't want to redesign every building for a COVID-19 environment that may go away at some point in the near future. That'd just be cost prohibitive, and it wouldn't be very, it'd change the way humans interact. But it could be a way to accomplish, like you were saying, both sides of the spectrum, where there's a temporary solution that can also be elegant as a permanent fixture.
Yeah, I think one thing to stick on too is there, especially in the restaurant world, there's a lot of opportunity outside of the realm of architecture that is being opened up. A lot of companies that I've worked with in the past, they do 30% of their business through deliveries. And there's been a lot of restaurants that have not done things like DoorDash and Uber Eats and what have you. And so I think another positive outcome of this is it's forcing people to start to consider these alternative revenue streams for them as our customers as well. And then it's how do you accommodate and facilitate those new functions that they're taking on. And so I think there's still a very much of a great way to identify what that hybrid is around really updating their current model to allow for this pickup, grab and go service that can still function around social distancing, but have your dining room that maybe also doubles as a staging space when you are closed. So there's definitely unique opportunities. I don't know if it's all architectural. I think there's a great opportunity for architects to educate on what those alternative opportunities are when it comes to placemaking and design. And so that might be part of the conversation to help kind of reinvigorate these people who are struggling, because there is, much like for us, alternative ways to make revenue. And opening those doors through design is a great way to add value.
You know, something Nan mentioned struck me. Nan was basically talking about, in a positive sense, how we as a society evolve. And some of that might be accelerating certain trends that were already happening. But the live-work balance, Nan, that you mentioned, I think is huge. I've already seen it with our whole team and myself. You know, I commute from Aspen to Basalt normally, and I've got an extra hour on my hands every day. And I'm able to hopefully get out and do my bike ride or walk, as you mentioned. And I think a lot of us are finding there's a lot of productivity in working at home in the right way. You know, I travel a lot normally, moving around all the time. Working remotely is not unique to me. We've been on Zoom and GoToMeeting forever, but somehow I'm finding myself more organized, and you know, there's a lot of positives that could come out of this. And then you expand that beyond the work live, you know, equation. I think it expands to, let's say, the resort experience. How is that going to evolve in a positive way, where you can get even more out of your time in Aspen or wherever you might be? Those are the kind of things we're starting to try to think through. And then what does that result in terms of physically what we're providing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question about what firms themselves physically provide. And sometimes, Matt, I'll ask you to jump in here, because sometimes it's market sector specific. Like you say, you know, this studio isn't doing so hot right now, but this other one might be if we get into that sector. But it's also the matrix of services too. So what's going through your mind as a firm principal as you're navigating, you know, scanning the landscape and seeing what we might want to do next?
Sure. Typologically, I'm not sure, at least for our firm, maybe I should take a step back. The Great Recession hit us extremely hard. We were pretty much solely in the hospitality resort developer driven world. We had never, not never, but rarely worked on any public work at all, or institutional work. And so during that Great Recession, we got pummeled. We were at maybe, let's say, 70 employees, and I think we went down to, I don't know, 10 to 15 through that. And that was quite brutal, dropped by about 80%, give or take. And through that, we figured out that we had to diversify our portfolio quite a bit. So we went into the public sector, mostly in higher ed, but also some GSA work. We did some state work, a little bit of municipality or municipal work, but just really broadened it. And we've maintained that diversity. And on a yearly basis, usually our board meetings at the end of the year, we go through that and we really think about what's our growth strategy and what's our contraction strategy? What are the triggers that force us to contract, so we can do that proactively? I think it's really quite important to not get too alarmed and don't get panicked, and to really be ahead of this so that we can respond to this with cool heads so that we can prevail, as it will, right? But I don't know if I'm answering the question really well. I think it's not so much changing the typologies necessarily, at least for our firm. I would say that broadly, it definitely makes sense to have a diversity of typologies, but really, like we're all talking about, how would we help with restaurants? Maybe it's outdoor dining, maybe it's DoorDash, office space. There's been a debate for the past probably half a decade or even longer about private office versus open office now. And now it seems like, well, maybe we'll shift towards private office plus remote working. Who knows? So we just have to be able to be in front of that and really think about how we can help our clients future-proof. I think it would be foolhardy to say, okay, we're just going to address everything that's COVID-19 related, because there could be another type of outbreak that comes out. So what are the basic principles that we can address that address all the different typologies, whether it's restaurants, office, student housing, multifamily, event centers, convention centers, all the different types. I guess on the positive spin on all of it is maybe it does go back to outdoor spaces and wellness. And one of the trends that has been changed and somewhat implemented by government, similar to AIA, has been sustainability, energy efficiency, tighter buildings, more insulation, and that's created better buildings. So maybe out of this, in the next year or two, or the next cycle of code changes, maybe there'll be additional requirements that will further promote wellness and well-being, and that inherently will allow us to weather these types of events down the road.
I really like, Matt, the way you're talking about the way you look ahead at where the market might be moving, and you look at that strategically. I think that that's what we all need to be doing, because and what you're saying reinforces my belief that there is definitely still a place for generalists in architecture. So the minute and of course there are a lot of pundits who say, no, if you're not a specialist, you're never going to live to the next decade, which I think that this pandemic proves it just the opposite.
Yeah.
So obviously it takes a long time to mature a new market if you want to go into something like you all chose to go into the public sector. So you really have to be looking ahead, and you really have to have a diverse enough portfolio that you can say, okay, when this market dries up, and it could be as sudden as something like this, you still have something that keeps the doors open. So I think that that was a great decision that you all made back then.
Yeah, can I poke a little bit further on that? So just echoing what Nan said about having a consistent and intentional leadership conversation about what you will do less of and what you would like to do more of, is if nothing else is taken from this call, put that on your to-do list. So first of all, how often do you have those conversations, and what measures do you use to say we're going to pull back from this one, or we're going to increase our efforts in this area?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
Or anybody has those kind of conversations.
Well, we do it on a fairly regular basis, but most intensely at year's end. But definitely quarterly, we'll have retreats, we'll have our monthly board meetings, and we go through and just try to assess the landscape as best as we can. We don't, again, kind of admitting that we're not economists and financial analysts, so we can't do that as well as perhaps those folks can, but we're trying to keep our ear to the ground and understand what's coming down the pike so we can plan for it the best that we can. So
what is a flag that says we need to reduce our efforts here, and what's something that you find that says we think this is an opportunity, here's a green light if we play our cards right?
I think saturation of a market, we even hospitality, right? With hotels, especially in the Front Range, there have been so many beds added in Metro Denver over the past few years. And we have a number of projects that are in hospitality hotels in Metro Denver right now. And so there's some concern. Are we going to hit a saturation point and all of a sudden those projects will go away? And it's a tenuous thing, because if they come and they say, hey, we want to do something great. Well, yeah, of course we want to join you and do that. But you have to make sure that you don't get too much of a good thing, and balance that out, and just be ready to act if somebody starts pulling back or you see market factors that are changing. And that one, the reason why we've held on to that one was because of the expansion of the convention center and the needs that Denver has. They needed, I forget the number of beds, but I think it was maybe 2,000 more additional beds, and above and beyond was already the carrying capacity of Metro Denver. So we figured strategically that made sense. That's just one anecdotal response to that one, Mike.
Yeah.
And it could even be within an industry that you're already in. So for instance, if you're in senior housing or senior living, you would probably look at this pandemic and say, okay, we're probably going to be downsizing, creating smaller clusters or smaller developments, as opposed to these mega developments that just add on and on and on. So you can use the knowledge that you've already established in a certain market sector, but you have to be able to change to accommodate the new needs within that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people talking about the commercial office market is just going to tank because
Yep.
people are realizing with all this work from home happening that they don't need as much square footage. But the fact is, whatever they do have is going to change drastically. So that's, while the overall pie may be shrinking, there's work for people to adapt those spaces to be done.
Yeah.
Which of course won't be done for free.
Yep.
Mhm.
I just
I'm
want to
curious.
remind everyone that that, believe it or not, Princess Cruises is still advertising cruises right now. And you can sign up today for any one of their 45 cruises to Asia. Hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
Probably get some crazy deals.
Yeah.
I'll skip that one. Rich, I'm curious, what conversations are you having as like a two-location office that's that's well known within a region?
Well, maybe somewhat like 4240, we often have the diversification question come up. We have evolved since the last recession, some, not as much as you guys probably, Matt. But I think part of what we're looking for is within, let's say, our resort projects, expanding opportunistically within larger projects, more things we get excited about, whether that's, you know, the maker spaces or arts center that comes out of a relationship. And so we've definitely had a goal of having 10 or 15% of our projects be more out of the box that we're normally been in. And that's been very invigorating for us and very exciting. A lot of great design opportunities have come out of that. And those kind of build on each other. So we haven't done a lot of public sector work, but we have done like the Aspen Art Museum and other projects like that that are out of relationships. And it was intentional that we keep looking for those opportunities within, mostly within our existing and hopefully ever growing relationships.
I think the other thing maybe you might to add in terms of diversifying our portfolio or even maintaining your portfolio the way it is, more or less, is to just think about your studio culture, your passions and your drive. Because yeah, we could say, okay, well, this market that I'm in isn't so great, but maybe I'll do this other one that's totally foreign, but it's more lucrative or it's more recession proof. But if you don't have a passion, you don't have anything to say about it, then that's not going to be very successful. What we tried to do is go into markets that maybe diversify our portfolio and balance it out, almost like you would your 401k or something, but it's something that we believe in and we can translate and we have something to say. So for instance, when we got into higher ed, we took the hospitality angle and brought them into higher ed. Or if we get into another sector, welcome centers or whatever it might be, those all have to have some relationship and come into something about your core beliefs and core culture within your firm, whatever that might be for you. I think that's really quite important.
Yeah, that's really good.
I want to come back to a theme you all touched on one way or another, and that is that it's, as Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again. There's a lot of negative feelings that this is forcing back up to the surface. You know, those were probably not only economically challenging times during the Great Recession, but psychologically just, you know, a kick in the gut. You know, good news, bad news. We're only 2 months into this, right? And who knows how long it lasts. How are you finding ways to not only sustain yourself, but keep morale in the firms, keep people focused and productive, and even in the midst of all this uncertainty?
Boy, Mike, I think that is so key. You think about how the Me Too movement took away our ability to hug each other, pat each other on the back. Now we can't even shake each other's hands. So, and we're reduced to looking at images of each other on the screen. I think it's so important when you think about staff being your most important asset, to be able to really connect with people. So not start out every conversation with, have you got that deliverable ready to go? Who needs to review it? But something more human, because these are times that call for a real human touch. And if you're not understanding where a person is or taking the time to find out about who their concerns about or what they've gone out and done just to get a little exercise, then you're really you're treating them as a commodity. So I think that we have to really make an effort as principals as people within firms to relate better to each other.
Yeah, I totally agree, and very well said, Nan. What we've seen is some exaggeration of people's personalities, whether that be good or bad. And it's really tricky, and it's very individual. And we, as a leadership team particularly, are working really hard to connect with everybody in the right way and to do what you're describing, Nan. We've also come up with a couple fun surprises. One in particular, we called it Moose Day, which is the reverse of Zoom. And we had the whole firm take the afternoon off, and it replaced a ski day that got canceled, by the way. The day after we left our office was going to be our ski day. We would take the afternoon, we all go skiing and socialize, of course, together. So, and we were social distance. So everybody was charged with go out and be in nature and have fun with your family or your significant other and take pictures. And then we'll come together Friday. That was a Wednesday, and Friday we have a beer 30 virtually every Friday. And let's share our stories, kind of Instagram moments. And it was really successful. And part of it was just unveiled a few days before. And we bought food for everybody from 4 local restaurants, kind of thing to support the restaurants, and everybody could go pick up their food. And that was just one specific thing we found really worked. And now we're trying to come up with the next one, or what would Moose 2 be, or et cetera, et cetera. And one thing we're talking about doing next week is to actually physically get together small groups, 5, maybe up to 10 people, which is well below the legal limits or whatever. Be very and make it clear that you don't have to go, but if you'd like to go, have a beer 30, if you will, together physically in the park with a group of people in the office. And as we poll people, that came out of polling around of what people really want to do. And they're basically like, I'm so sick of looking at each other on the screen. It would be so great if we get together and have a meeting, or meet in the backyard of the office, or play ping pong in the back. We have an outdoor ping pong table. And so anyway, those are just some examples in the short term. But to me, you got to keep mixing it up. If it becomes some kind of expectation, or just people don't have the same power and excitement to have people be connecting.
People are adapting in record time. Circumstances. Nick or Matt, what are you guys doing to sustain yourselves?
We're doing a couple of different things over at Method. Really, a lot of it mirrors what's already been said. I've always actually liked to start meetings off with about 5 to 10 minutes of banter. I find that if you let people get that energy out, they focus a lot better for the remaining part of the meeting. So we have started, but we have like a spirit animal when someone's not focusing, it's a squirrel. And so we start every meeting off with feeling squirrely. And a lot of that just really has to do with sharing things that we're doing in our entertainment instead of our entertainment. And this goes from what music are you listening to the latest thing on Netflix, to the Joe Exotic water cooler banter. And it actually, I have found that it still holds up. It's allowing people to kind of get that human interaction in whatever way and form that it happens before we start to talk about the work. And we've also started doing team lunches. So it's really nice to have that physical touch. So being able to place an order of delivery, get something at your desk, and then sit with the team has been a really meaningful way to still connect with people. And we've even started to invite our consultants and whatnot to that as well. So we are starting to build camaraderie outside of the company as well. And I guess that's too an opportunity of the remoteness, is really anybody can be a part of it. So our beer 30s have been open to the world, even just to see who comes in, with varying success. But yeah, we have been trying a lot of different things. Some things, it really comes down to timing, and if people want to go and sit down and do a beer 30 or get outside. But creating that opportunity to communicate and have that water cooler banter, I think has done miles for the morale of the team throughout being stuck inside for a few months.
And I think I'm seconding everything that everybody else is saying, so it's a little bit redundant, but yeah, we're doing a lot of the same, sort of the beer 30s, if you will. In that case, it's usually just getting all office updates. How are we doing this week? Because things, I don't know about you all, but it feels like these weeks have been the slowest weeks in the past decade. It's just, everything's changing. You're trying to figure it out. How's this going to work? And it's been probably more mentally, emotionally exhausting than most the past decade, I'd say. We definitely have those deadlines, and we work, all hours of the night, sometimes have those all-nighters, but there's something different about this that's emotionally pretty challenging. So we're doing a lot of one-on-one check-ins, team check-ins, and then all firm check-ins. Sometimes it's on projects, sometimes it is, like I said, the beer 30s. Usually those are updates for the firm, but also design charrettes or critiques, what's going on with this project or that project. And frankly speaking, I think also what really helps is to make sure that people are busy, that they have something fun and exciting that they can work on, that they're not just sitting and feeling and letting their minds wander, but they're really focused on whatever the tasks are, whether it's a project, whether it's standards, marketing, renderings, business development, whatever it is, just making sure that we're really active. I think that's really great for our psychology.
There's some positives and minuses to the situation we're in. On the positive side, there's people are happy to not have the commute, not be interrupted over the course of the day by whatever is happening in the office around you. But that fact of going to a physical place to work did have some positives. There were built-in bumpers or guardrails, so to speak. You could, that commute helped you focus before you got to the office and decompress when you came home, so you weren't carrying it to your family. It gave you specific times for which you could devote to outside activities, professional development, personal development. All those lines are blurred and gone now. So I guess the question I would have is, how are you making time for professional development, advancing in your career beyond just project focused stuff? Because I think that's what every firm wants to do now. They want to keep their clients happy, keep the work, going out the door and coming in the door. But at some point, you can't just be project focused. You got to keep growing as a professional.
So, Mike, I think that the firms that are probably going to do the best in this kind of environment, barring whatever market they happen to be in, are the firms that are actually taking time for mentoring, and mentoring on a real one-to-one basis. Because I see just as what happened in 2008, we lost a lot of young professionals, a lot of people who were coming out of school who never got jobs, who never came back to architecture. So this is a moment where if we spend a little more time really one-on-one with our younger professionals, encouraging them, asking them, explaining a detail to them, doing whatever, making them feel as though they're part of a growing knowledge base, I think we're going to keep those people, and I think we're going to be stronger for it.
Yeah, and I'd love to add to it is we have adopted a lot of transparency. Everything that the company is doing is being shared from the youngest person at the company to the most senior person. And I'm a big believer in the Toyota method and getting people to move things in the right places and being more of the operations guy. By adopting all of this transparency and allowing people to talk about what they're dealing with and all of these issues, we've been able to identify a lot of barriers and actually streamline our processes. And so I think the happy accident of moving to remote and needing all of this kind of digital communication has allowed us to pull down those walls and say, okay, what do you need? What's blocking you? And how do we get that out of the way? And we've started doing that through using kind of a Trello board so everybody can see how tasks are moving along. If something gets caught up, everybody gets flagged so we can triage it. And that level of transparency has been really good for me as a project manager, because I think we all innately kind of want to micromanage and get our hands into a project because we love our work. But being able to see the progress and see that without actually physically communicating it has allowed our team to maintain a sense of autonomy, but also do the critical communication that helps the people who are trying to make sure everything's going right, be able to see that movement happen at the same time.
And I saw your, the wheels turning when I was asking that question. It was maybe one you hadn't considered before.
Yeah, it's just a hard one to answer because I think it's different for everybody. I've been around, long enough now that a lot of the development is maybe not as meteoric, if you will. But I think what's really unique is these are all new problems. So how do we solve these? I mean, ultimately, we're all just problem solvers, right? We're solving problems in a variety of different ways. Usually they're spatially or budgets or details or what have you. But now we're trying to figure out, for our office, for instance, we just started coming back into the office, a limited amount, maybe about a third of us are in the office at any time, about maybe 5 to 10 people. And how do we figure that out? We've got hand sanitizers, and we have placards on the wall and markings, and certain conference rooms that are too small are off limits, and we've actually moved people's desks around. Those are things that I didn't anticipate us having to solve, but in terms of being a business owner, that was something unique that we had to problem solve. Thinking about the financials, we did apply for the PPP loan. How does that work? You have to read that whole document and understand the mechanisms of that. So there's a lot of growth in terms of maybe sort of firm operations that I didn't anticipate. I do think that Nan mentioned a great point, which is, specialists versus generalists. I think for a lot of young individuals, a lot of times they say, I want to focus on, I want to be a designer, I want to be a renderer, I want to be a this, or I want to be a that. In the architectural profession, I think it's probably better to be a generalist, a Jack and Jill of all trades, than it is to say, I just want to focus on this one thing. That's going to really present resiliency. And I think it also helps as architects to really understand different people, different circumstances. And if you have experienced a few different things, and you can really take that all in and be very nimble. So I found that to be really great. And that's something that I try to mentor for a lot of the younger staff at our firm. Some of them want to be specialists, and if they want to be, that's fine. But generally, I'm saying, okay, well, just taste this.
Whoops.
Well, Matt froze. That's a good opportunity to get into some of the audience questions. I'll just take them in turns here. The first question: are you helping hotels or resorts and condos address visitor concerns about COVID and cleaning?
Sorry, Mike, I couldn't hear that question.
Are you helping hotels or resorts or condos address visitors' concerns about COVID and cleaning?
Rich, are you working?
I think I kind of mentioned that before. I would say not really. Our main focus is more in the mid to longer term and trying to figure out where the situation we're in is going to lead us to in terms of how we're designing places and spaces in the future. So we haven't interacted with our clients on their operational short-term adjustments much. That's probably not entirely true. We have some projects we're doing, but it's still thinking about what the project's going to be. But COVID has already certainly affected our thinking on queuing, for example, in terms of a ticketing operation for a ski area. There is some rethinking going on, but again, that's for a project that's going to be built a year or two from now. And there's huge looming question of how much change we really need to make, because we don't know where we're going to be in 2 years. So, that doesn't fully answer the question, but that's been our experience.
Yeah, there's certainly people in that space on the operation maintenance side that come up with a short-term solution that may have to be factored into the architectural.
That's what's happening for us with like the Aspen Skiing Company. There's been some things that they've changed, and now it brings up for the operation group, how will it change the programming for the new facilities? Yeah.
So as you're opening up your offices again and thinking about what that looks like, it's not just the space you can control, but as you're putting your employees out on the road, for example, what are your thoughts on air travel for business, for your employees or for sub-consultants? Are you doing anything contractually to address firm concerns or liability from potential claims from these folks?
We're looking into all that. So we have, for example, a project in Montana that needs to be punch listed soon. And we've been talking with the local firms. Could someone step in to help us out? Could it be done remotely and digitally, which obviously has lots of challenges? I think our team is not real excited about right now flying up there. I mean, maybe that'll change in a month, but it seems a little early. And we really want to make sure we're listening to our staff and making sure they truly hear. If you're not comfortable, let's make sure we're not putting you folks in a situation where you're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
That includes job site visits, even locally. So, and it kind of varies by staff somewhat. You know, it's allowed and legal now to do a job site visit here in Pickens County and Telluride soon, and et cetera. And most of our staff have been fine with it, but it, you know, gets into those particulars and really listening, you know. And I think a number of us have been talking about how we make sure we're really listening, we're over communicating, and we're really connecting with the ups and downs that everybody's going to be going through as part of this as it continues. So it's a very important part of our jobs, and kind of overdoing it is better than underdoing it. So.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is it's not so much a contractual response as it is a management and communications response.
Yeah, and of course with our clients.
Yeah.
So.
Welcome back, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, my internet went down for a moment.
Yeah. The question we were just talking about was if firms are, as they think about not only reopening their offices, but sending people out in the field for various functions, if you've addressed that in any way.
They mostly address themselves. All of the contractors have safety as top of mind normally, and also especially now that every site has their own procedures. For instance, we're working on a project called the Inn at Cherry Creek in Cherry Creek North. Hazelton's the contractor, and what they've elected to do is set up 4 10-hour days, and then Fridays are off for all the contractors, for all the trades, and then the inspectors come on those days, or clients or the consultants will come on those days. And when you enter the site, you have to have a mask on. Obviously, all the rest of your typical PPE on site. And then they're doing other unique things like circulation patterns. There are stair cores that are dedicated for ups, stair cores are dedicated for down, all these other procedures. So those by and large are taking care of themselves. But I think I believe, I don't know if it was Rich's point, I think it was, is that if folks in our firm don't feel safe, we don't pressure them whatsoever. We just find another way of addressing the situation. And that's not only on site, but also within the office, of course, too.
What I've heard from attorneys is don't make up your own policy. Find guidelines that already exist, whether it be contractors' guidelines for the job site, public health authority guidelines for the job site, CDC recommendations. You know, make sure to follow guidelines that other people have written rather than coming up with your own.
Absolutely.
Another question we had was the earlier conversation about specific how clients are being helped to develop specific design solutions versus how do our practices survive? Or is that the same thing? Do our design responses hold the key to our financial survival?
Absolutely, they're intertwined. Client service, financial well-being, design, they're all intertwined. That's why we're here, right? Is to be designers, to be practitioners, and supporting our clients' needs to solve their problems and their problems within their community. We were talking about being strategic and thinking ahead. I think one of the big obligations as architects and just practitioners largely, or designers largely, is to really wake up and figure out, okay, how can I help my client today? How can I help my client today solve a problem that we're not even really thinking about, you know, right now, but will be one 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, and really trying to help the client future-proof their design so we don't have to come back and fix that.
So two more questions. First one I'll say is, you know, so we asked you to be on this panel to talk about emerging from the storm, not just weathering the storm. And on the positive negative side, are you having gone through something similar before and survived it, does that give you some confidence to draw on that experience and you know some of the tools that are in the playbook to start implementing? Or does it just bring back more of the dread about what's going to happen in the future? Or is it just about 50-50?
So one of the things that the 2008 downturn taught us was that, as I think you mentioned earlier, Matt, having that public sector work really kind of inoculates you to some degree to downturns. And certainly, even in this pandemic, we've found that the federal government work is holding up pretty well. Now, that might change as we're spending trillions of dollars on stimulus. They're ultimately going to have to pull money out of capital projects. That's already happening on the state and local levels, but the federal government really helps you get through these hard times.
Mhm.
Note to self, diversify. Get a GSA contract.
I think for us, going through the last downturn really has made us more nimble, more sophisticated, more flexible, wiser. It doesn't feel as bad to me now, but again, I don't want to jinx it. But I think we've all probably had a lot of, coming out of the last downturn, kind of reinvestment that we finally were able to do, not just money, but initiatives and agendas. And we have, on a positive standpoint, if we slow down, and we haven't actually slowed down that much yet, but we really have some big agendas and initiatives that we've been wanting to get to, and we haven't done it very well. And so we have those racked up, and we're actually doing work programs for them right now. We're trying to schedule people's time to be doing these internal initiatives to move us forward. And we're part of a roundtable that we work with 12 other firms from around the country that are non-competitors, and we learn from each other. And we've fired that up more than ever to learn from each other. What are we doing? So when we come out of this, what's our firm of the future? So I think we all need to dig deep on, taking time when we're all trying to hopefully not just survive, but how are we going to move forward? What's our version of that? And I think the reset is happening to our society too. It's a, what do we really care about? I think we've all talked about our passions. We don't want to just go in another market sector if we don't love it and care about it. So we're spending a lot of time doing that. And maybe it's extra time, but it's worth the investment of the effort to get organized and get ready to do it. So, and then do it.
I think one thing that, and this is coming from the Ingenious, which is an architecture firm, that I think they did really well that firms could do too, is we have what we call a blue book. And it's really a book full of the blue sky dreams of all of the employees that work at the company, of things that you really wish you could get to at some point. And as soon as things started to turn for us, we cracked it open and started to get to work. And so that's really helped us stay productive and start to execute new ideas and bring really fresh things to the company, when we would probably have had people twiddling their thumbs. So having these kind of opportunities and channels set up ahead of time can really help you come up with a resilient plan, or at least opportunities to work on things. Because you never want to be reacting as the moment's occurring. Having a plan ahead and being able to deploy it is really meaningful. And so that's something we had done, thankfully, almost 3 months before this all happened. And we were able to reposition a lot of our company to still be very productive and actually work toward some of our more lofty goals while we couldn't be spending our time in some of the areas that were dried up.
I like that. The blue book.
Mm-hmm.
Blue book.
Nick, what was in the, just real quick, what was in the blue book?
So it's all sorts of different things around, because this is, and again, this is like from a different business model, but we were talking about, product improvements, things that we saw people asking for, or user interactions, and how could we do that? But others were around complete workflow. So if someone is picking up working with a new customer, how can we define a process and systematize it so that that works for the second customer that comes through? And so we're doing a lot of focus on operationalizing and templating that can help us be faster when things get better. And then there's other things that are really just housekeeping, like, goodness, I wish my client database was a little bit more organized. We want to be able to track by this piece of information, but only 25% of them had it in their line item. So let's go back and do that housekeeping now so that we can be more nimble moving forward. Because, this isn't going to be forever. That's the good news. And so what we're doing is really operationalizing and systemizing. So when things do start to recover, we can do 2x what we were doing before rather than still slogging through the mud.
Nice. Well, before I get to the final word, which will be this: if you had just one word or phrase or mantra or quote that would encourage people to come out of this in a way that's resilient, what might that be? And then just to wrap things up here, to ensure you receive your credit for today's session, please put your full name in the chat function, or if you've already done the RSVP, that'll serve that purpose as well, via the calendar link in the chat previously. And then next week on Tuesday, we have an HSW credit for you from Studio NYL, who's doing a presentation on bridging and thermal continuity of the building skin. And on Wednesday, we have how the state is adapting to COVID-19, featuring state architect and friend of ours, fellow in the AIA, Sherry Giroux. I know, here's my words that I've gotten from you, and you can certainly repeat them. We've got Moose Days, Blue Book, mentoring, jumping in, annual portfolio review, diversification, rebalancing. Those are some of my notes, but I'll let you guys have the last word. Go ahead, Nanny, you can start us out.
Leap and the net will appear.
Nice. Rich?
I had nimble.
Nick?
I'd say problems are opportunities.
Nice. Matt?
Maybe a few more words than that, but we're all in this together. And I think that is really a salient point here. I think it's great that we can all pick up the phone and call each other and figure out, well, how do we figure this out? And so that's something that I think is really unique about this one. But maybe it's a little cliche, but this too shall pass, just like all of the others. We just need to wait it out. It feels like it's a really long time, but we'll look back soon enough and realize that it wasn't that bad, and now we're marching forward.
I would amend that phrase to say, but let's not let it pass us by.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great job, everyone. It was a terrific conversation, very engaging and enlightening, as of course we expected from this group. Thanks for joining us today and sharing what you had to share. And thanks to all of our participants out among our membership. We're hoping that you are having a good week and took something positive from this as well. And stay tuned for more such conversations in the future. And again, thanks Nan, Rich, Nick, and Matt for your time today. We appreciate it.